the tomb of Ramses III, and they depict the enemies of Egypt, both Asiatics and Nubians. Now, keep in mind, by the time Ramses III came, foreign powers had already ruled Egypt, namely the Hyksos. And of course, Ramses II, who is actually not related to Ramses III, also omitted the names of Tutankhamun and his family from the lineages of royals because they went to the worship of the autumn. Now, were they legitimate? I would guess they were. But the study came out that showed that the DNA of Tutankhamun and his family and the DNA of Ramses III had come out. And Ramses III's DNA was not even controversial. He was R1b DNA, which is associated with Black Africans. Now, last time I talked about the DNA of Tutankhamun and his family and how they interpret it as Middle Eastern DNA. But now we shall look at a graph that shows that this story is not as it seems. So what we will do is we will compare the DNA that is found in these people to these sub-Saharan African clades. As you can see, the graph says Y-DNA haplogroup in populations of sub-Saharan African, and the references refer to genetic tests that were done inside smaller groups that are then glued into this graph. So we shall start with R1b because that's the genetics that is depicted in the first one. So what we will do is we will compare the DNA that is found in these people to these sub-Saharan African clades. As you can see, the graph says Y-DNA haplogroup in populations of sub-Saharan African, and the references refer to genetic tests that were done inside smaller groups that are then glued into this graph. So we shall start with R1b because that's the genetics that is depicted in the first one. To make it simple, we'll just notice that R1b is the second last percentage. So let's see, Afroasiatic 20%, R1b. It's 000 in these other groups, and then 5.5% in Bantus. Let's go straight to the one. 4.8% in Beja, which is a Cushitic people. Then it's 27% in Cameroon, 70% in Cameroon, 1.1% in the grass fields in Cameroon. Then the Bantus have 0. The Copts have 15%. The Daza have 33%. The Fulbe have 53%. The Hausa have 40%. 12% in Herero, the Bantu people in Herero. 50% in Saharan Kenembu. 1.6% in Khoisan. 1.4% in Niger Congo. 10% in the Nubians. 95% in Chadic Afroasiatic speakers. 3% in Pygmies. 8% in Indo-Europeans. 40% in Arabic speakers. 51% in South African white people. 15% in Sudanese. Let's go all the way down, skip the ones with zero. Berber, 33%, and 4.8% in the Yoruba, and the Zulus and closest have zeros. Now, I could tell you easily here, this R1b is vague because, like you can see, there's people in Europe who have this DNA. There's people in Africa who have this DNA. Now, there's different variants of this DNA, and so we have to ignore this test because how do we know which variant is being used? And then, secondly, is it not African? Is it African? Nobody knows. You're probably wondering why I skipped A and B and E1A, and that's because this is like fundamental DNA. But let's go to the next one, which is represented on this list, which is E1B1B. And the reason why I bring it up is because, as you can see on this Tutankhamun's DNA, it says Tutankhamun had 12%, 12.5% E1B1B, and the other dude had 0% E1B1B. So Tutankhamun's got 12%. Let's see if we have no percentage. And of course, R1b, I should have said this earlier. R1b, he has 31.5%, which, as we can see, there's a variant of R1b that is African, and there's a variant of R1b that is European. Now, which one is it that's being specified here? And then, of course, E1B1B, let's look it up because since Tutankhamun is 12% of it. So E1B1B is fourth from the back. So let's see. The Afro-Asiatic have 34%. 45% is the Semitic, Ethiopians. 0.1% Bantus. 13.7% Bantus in Kenya. 21% Bantus in Tanzania, 4.4% Bantus in Southern Africa, 1.5% Bantus in South Africa, 52% Beja, 0% Benin, 80% Berbers, 14% in Togo and Niger Congo, 2.8% in Niger Congo, 33% in Cushitic, 3.7% in Chadic, 13% in Bantu, 21% in Arabic, Copts, 45%, 54% in Nilotic, 15% Nilotic, 48% in Afro-Asiatic, 50% in Semitic Ethiopian Jews, 34% in Sudanese Fulbe, 59% in Fur people, 1.1% in Kwa in Ghana, 6.0% in Guinea, 15% in the Hadza, 3.1% in Chadic, 28% in the northeastern Bantus, 3% in northeastern Bantus, 56% in Cushitic Iraq. What was that? Yeah, 6.7% in Khoisan, 16% Khoisan, 14% Khoisan, northeastern Bantu 19%, 11% in Khoisan, 50% in Nilotic, 8% in Mandika, 4.4% in Guinea, 71% in Masalit, 3.9% in Niger Congo, 14% in Nilo-Saharan, 33% in Nilo-Sahara, 23% in Nubian Arabs, 39% in Nuba, 16% in Nilotic, 62% in Cushitic, 34% in Sandawa, 6.5% in Niger Congo, 80% in Somali, 9.6% in Indo-Europeans, 16.7% in Semitic, 24% in Nilotic, 62% in Nilo-Sahara, 77% in Berber, 90% in Berber, 16% in Berber, 1% in Bantu, 12% in Senegambia, 5% in Xhosas, and 0% in Bantus. Now you will notice that there's some which have very low percentage. Remember, these are percentages of the people who were tested, and some of these people have admixture, meaning that it's not necessarily a African DNA, but of the group that was tested, some people. So in the case of the closer people, the five people, the 5% might be representative of mixed being having one parent in their distant past who was of a different genetic system. But with these significant populations, the Nala Saharans and all these other people, that's usually due to the fact that there's a variant of this DNA in Africa. So again, you have another DNA that's in the list that is being shown to be visible in both Europe and Africa. Now these people took this and made it sound like um, because some of these are more frequent in Europe or the Middle East, this means that the Egyptians must be Middle Eastern. But the frequency has nothing to do with it, especially if you consider how frequent it is in some populations in Africa. And of course, the third one that we're going to look at is E1B1A, which is the one found mainly in Africa, which, yeah. So the next one is E1B1A, and this is the African DNA. It's most frequent in sub Saharan Africa. And like I said with the other ones, um, in small percentages, usually it's a sign of being mixed. So you noticed that in the populations, in the list, they have the populations, but of the people tested, we see the percentages. And in R1b and E1B1B, what we noticed is that some populations have up to 40%, 20%. Those ones, it's very difficult to just say they're mixed, except like people from Ethiopia and places like that, that they're mixed with that DNA. And Ethiopia is a hard one because how we know what is what and what's not what, because there's back migration, there's forward migration, all the stuff. But let's get into this one. But I want you to keep in mind that there's a lot of mixing with black people with the populations that have been tested. So we expect Indo Europeans to have zero. So the Afroasiatics, it's 3.3, 11 in Nilotic, Semitic, it's 0. Grassfield, 100, 79.4 in Bantu, 51.7 in Bantu, 48.2 in Bantu, 54.7 in Bantu, 66.2 in Bantu, 0 in Cushitic, 95 in GBAE, which is Benin, 5% in Berber, 96% in Niger Congo, 81% in Niger Congo, 4% in Cushitic, 54% in Adamawa, 13% in Chadic, 93% in the Grassfields, 63% in Bantu NC, 0% in Arabic, 87% in Cross River, 11% in Nilotic, 46% in Dogon, 48% in Senegambian, but 0% in Afroasiatic and 0% in Semitic. Senegambian, 13%. Quad, 92%. Hadzas, 26%. 12% in Chadic, 28% in Northeastern Bantu, 70% in Bantu, 83% in Bantu, 89% in Igboid, 11% in Cushitic. Um, yeah. Um, in the Sahara, 0%, Khoisan 24%, Khoisan 23%, 35%, 73% in Northeast Bantu, 39% in Khoisan, 66% in Nilotic, 16% in Nilotic, 34% in Polynesian, 79% in Mende, 86% in Mende, 0% in Masalit, 90% in Gur. Khoi Khoi is 18%, 100% in Bantu, 68% in Niger Congo, 29% in Nilo Saharan, 9.9% in Nilo Saharan, 0% in Arabs and Nilo Saharans from that area, 0% in Nuba, 0% in Nilotic, 0% in Cushitic Afroasiatics, 0% in Chadic Afroasiatics, 34% in um, Mbuti, the Central Sudanese, 28% in Niger Congo, 84% in Indo-Europeans from Sao Tome and Principe, which, by the way, Sao Tome and Principe is in Africa. Like, these are mixed people. I just don't want you to get confused by that 84%. 43% in Sandawe, Senegalese 81%, 0% in Nilotic, zero not applicable in Arabia, 1.5% Cushitic, 0.6% in South African whites. It's 0.6%. 0% in Semitic. By the way, that 0.6%, I have to explain this again, is due to mixture. 0.6%. South African whites is white people in South Africa. 0% Semitic, 0% Nilotic, 0% in Nilo Saharan, 16% in Berber, 9% in Berber, 44% in Berber, uh, 80% in northeastern Bantu, Senegambian 68%, Dafoid 92%, Dafoid 93%, 54% Bantu, Southern Pacific 54%. Okay, so again, the interpretation of this would be that this DNA is most frequent in West Africa, right? And so it's probably one of those that are West African in its nature. But then, secondly, again, it doesn't mean that the people who are in Egypt now are from West Africa. Do not misunderstand the DNA. It just says that the people with the highest affinity to them are from West Africa. They could be from any place in Africa. It's just that the highest that you find is in West Africa. They could be from anywhere in Africa. What we do know is that, as you saw, Asia, Europe, and other places. Oh, yeah, East Africa. They have 0% of this DNA unless they're mixed with Bantu people, then or Niger Congolese people, they tend to have 0% of this. And since this is a list of people who live in sub-Saharan Africa, you can see that of the people who are tested, there's that white percent that has 0.6%. That means that in their deep ancestry, they have someone who's black, probably 300, 400 years ago. And the Indo European DNA of the people from Sao Tome and Principe, they also have a mixture, but theirs is way higher of this frequency. So again, This is a exclusively African DNA, but you have seen some of this DNA in parts of southern Spain, in parts of the Middle East at a very, very low level, and in what's that island? The island of Crete. You've seen it there. It's been discovered at least once. Now, again, probably were mixed people who lived in those areas, but these are very small. So, E1B1A is mainly an African DNA. Our E1B1B in its mainness is mainly found in Asia, with high frequencies, and Europe in high frequencies, but it's also been found in Africa in high frequencies in certain parts of Africa. Other parts it's zero. Other parts it's virtually non-existent, and some parts we have to take with a grain of salt, because when you get down to like 4%, 3%, and they live in places like South Africa or wherever where there's people who mixed with each other, you have to then take that with a grain of salt. R1b is found highly in parts of Africa where they're not mixed, and then you find them in parts of Africa where they are mixed. So in South Africa, you would expect R1b to show up, and it does. But this can be shown to be maybe they're mixed with white people, and this is true of these DNA. Some people who talk about the ancient Egyptians like to ignore the DNA results. I don't. Because if the results contradict my beliefs, I will change my mind. But this is what I will say: the truth fears no question.